Hi guys, welcome to COSC210 lab session number 7, and today we're going to be building a data-driven web application using the PHP web programming language. So to get started today, you're going to be quickly creating a new database. I've called my one apps, using your apps database user in the same way as you did back in practical number 4. But today we'll call our database apps MLChate, or I've called mine MLChate apps prac 7. So go through and create a new database, and once again, like you did back in practical session 5, you'll be uploading the database backup that you created from the first practical session, so your employee database, up to your prac 7 database. So we'll be using our company database that we've been working through all of the practical sessions again in this practical session. So once you've got that up and running, just use the \DT command to check that all of your data tables are present. So to get started on, we'll move on into the exercises for today. So PHP is a very popular web scripting language that allows us to create some really rich web applications. And today we're going to look at connecting up a PHP web application to our PostgreSQL database. Now, our web pages aren't going to look very nice, but they're going to have all of the database functionality that you'd expect to see on a web-based app. So to implement this, so first of all, if we consider the problem of finding employee names given their social security number, so to implement this problem as a web application, we're going to need to construct 2 web pages. So the first one will be will contain a HTML web form that will have a list of social security numbers of employees and a submit button. And upon selecting the social security number that we want out of the drop-down list, we can then go and click our Get Employee Details button to return those on the page that follows. So I've already created, so to demonstrate how this app is going to work, I'm just going to go and open up a new page here. I've already had this one up and running, and I've just got to go to my MLChate, and I want the P1 post, so we want our database example. So you can see on my web page here up in the top corner, I've got a drop down that lists all of the employee social security numbers, and if I click Get Employee Details, it returns the name for me. So effectively, I'm running through and grabbing that data. Now, both of these web pages will contain dynamic information. So if we go back to my web page example, if we go to the first page, this is going to be dynamic because the values in this list are going to depend what's in the database at any given time. And if we go to the Get Employees Details page, the employee information returned is going to be dynamic based upon the social security number or the primary key that I've selected in the previous post. So essentially, you're wiring together 2 web pages that both have some non-static, or they have dynamic content in them. So both of these web pages will require us to do some PHP scripting. And if we look at the first example, so this is our simple database access example, and this is sort of the hello world of our database programming examples. And we can see here that our code example starts off looking like a normal HTML page. So you've got some HTML, you've got some head tags that contain the title of our sample web page. We then have our body tags. And then we start with these special PHP tags. So these PHP tags indicate that the code that appears between these isn't going to be interpreted as HTML. So these always appear in pairs. So you can see here they open with the angled bracket and the question mark and the PHP keyword, and they close with the question mark and the angled bracket. Now, the first part of the code, the PHP code here, gets you to set up your database credentials. So you'll put your apps database password in there, you'll put your username in here, and you'll also put the name of your apps database. So in this example, recall that we've set this all up to be your apps prac number 7 database, and you'll need to put your apps username and password into these variables. They'll then be used to connect up to the database. So we can connect up to our database by first creating what's called a connection string that has all of the information in here. So we have the host and the port number in there, and then we connect up using our password, username, and database. And we call the PG connect function to connect up to our database, and that will return the DB connection object. Now we can go, once we've got our database successfully connected up, we can go through and we can launch some queries on our database. We can do that using the PG query function. However, we have to first construct our query string. We'll do that in this example. We're just creating a simple static query where we're selecting a list of social security numbers from our employees. And we go through, and when we call the PG query function, it'll execute the query that we supply to it as a parameter, and it'll return a result set. So this result set will have a row in it for each row that's returned by the query from our database. So essentially this PG query application is connecting up to the database, running the query that we pass to it, and then returning the results of that query in a structure that we can access. So you can see here we then close off our PHP tags to display some more basic HTML stuff. So we set up our heading for our page, and we also set up our form names, our form bits and pieces, and we can then go through and iterate through. We then have some open tags. We iterate through and create our list of employee values for each of our types here. So you can see here we go through and use the PG fetch array function, and it goes through and grabs a single line from our result set, assigns it to the line variable, and for each item, each basically column in each of our lines, we go through and we create a new entry in our drop-down menu. So what we're doing in this code is essentially populating this drop-down menu. So if we go back and look at the code here, you can see that we start by opening up our select open tag. We then use some PHP code to populate each of the entries. So each of the entries is specified by this option tag. And we use the col value, so this is going to be there's only going to be one column returned from our query, so it's going to be the social security number, and it'll create each of those items in the drop down as we work through. And once we've populated all of those items, we can close off. So we're back outside the PHP block here, and we close off the select item, so our drop down menu, and we close off our form with the submit button there just before we finish up. So essentially, we're grabbing a list of all of the social security numbers for every employee from our database, and we're iterating through each line of that query and using the returned value, the returned social security number value, to create a new entry in this drop-down menu. So it's a little bit tricky, that little section, but ultimately we're creating a nice dynamic drop-down. So in order to get this item working, you should copy it to a PHP, a text file with the .php extension, and you need to drop it into your public HTML directory. So your public HTML directory is in the root of your home directory, and when you get it in there, you will have to go through and fix up the permissions on the file so that it can be accessed by the PHP interpreter program on Turing. So you can see if we perform the chmod function on all of your PHP files, it'll give everybody read access to them. So that will include the PHP user. And when you go and get that example up and running, you should be able to see all of the items listed down through here. When you click on that, it'll then do the second part of our script. So if we jump through, we can then go and implement the other half of this application. So the other half of the application needs to display the GUI information. So you're going to create a second PHP file, and we're going to call that p1.php. Now, the naming of this one is kind of important, because back in your original file here, your simple database, example, you specified that the form name should be p1.php. So this name here in the action attribute of your form needs to match the name of the second PHP file. So essentially, this PHP application or web page is going to be sending information via a post request to your second web page. So it needs to know what that web page is called. So if you call it P1, it'll be able to find it. Now, again, we start off, the only tricky new piece of code that we've thrown in here is this line where we grab the SSN field from the post object. Now, the post object is going to contain any value that's sent over via this option here. And we can see that the name of our selection drop down, so the name of this little widget here, this selection widget, is called SSN. So it's called SSN. We've given that select widget and the name of SSN. So when it posts the information across to the second script, it's expected to be in the SSN index of this post request. So if we grab this SSN value, we can then use it to create a query string that grabs the information for that particular employee. So you can see here we've got a query, and we're just pasting in our SSN value here into the query and then executing it and echoing out the object that's returned. So we'll end up returning a single record from our database, because there's only one record for every social security number, and that will be returned again. Remember to substitute in all of your connection details into this section. As we move through the code, you can see we specify our query. The only little tricky thing here is that we can, in PHP, you can just drop variables into double quoted strings, and they'll be interpreted as the value that's stored within that variable. So we've surrounded that by our single quotes as well within our query. And by doing that, we can then create our item. We then create our query string rather. We call our PG query function to return our result set, and we then iterate through. We grab our result set using the PG fetch object function, and then echo that out. So if you go through, cut and paste that into your file, into your P1 post file, you'll be able to view the information. So if I select a particular SSN, you can see that I get the information printed out for that employee. So run through that demo, and you can then complete that one. So we've got a couple of other demonstrations here. The next demonstration displays, I guess, a list of all employees in a given department shown. So the interesting thing here is that we're going to use the get type parameter. Now, get parameters are specified on the URL. So you can see down here the line of code, the first line of code is slightly different to the previous example. The previous example we were using post type variables. Here we're using get type variables. So we're grabbing the department number or DNO value specified on the URL line of our application. So if I go through and run my example here, you'll see that, sorry, what was the name of my file? Oops. It is, oh, sorry, what name is my file? I might not have that one present in here. It's P2. So if I jump to P2, so I need to specify, I've got the syntax there, so I need to specify the department number. And when I do that, I get all of the employees in department number 2, which isn't many. Or there we go, department number 1, department number 4, number 5, etc. So we specify those values, the department number, on the command line. Then we pick that value out and store it in a variable called DNO. Remember, we need to substitute in all of our connection information. Then we need to drop all of the, then we go through and execute our query, again, substituting in our department number variable into the string. When we do that, we get a list of results returned, and we can iterate through those. And we're creating a table, a HTML table, and then each row in the table is specified by the results returned using this code. So essentially it'll run through and implement all of implement the table with the department numbers. Now, we're going to finish up with a much larger example that consists of 4 different SQL scripts to browse our company. So I've provided the code for these. So we've got company browse, department view, employee view, and project view. And these are the 4 files that we'll be using to create a simple browser application for our department's our company database. I've got all of the code there. All you need to do is cut and paste those in and you'll be able to work with it. Now, once we do that, we'll end up with a nice company browser, a company database browser. So just to demo that really quickly, if we go to companybrowse.php, you can see it starts off by specifying the department name. It specifies, then links to the employees and projects for each department, and you can link to the project view, the employee view, and the department view. So you've got those 4 there to run through and implement in a similar way to what we saw before. So if you run through and implement all of that code in that file, again remembering to cut and paste to substitute in your username and password for these items. So in this exercise, we've got some coding for you. You've got to construct a web page that allows you to browse the contents of the Booktown database that we work with in practical exercise 1. And once you've so should get your P1 database in place, and you can connect up to it using the same connections specified here. Only update the database name. Remember that we're using our apps database users for these ones, so you need to make sure that you do that exercise by creating your Booktown database in your apps, using your apps users. So just create it in your Practical 7 database, and you should be fine to connect up to it. So it's worth noting that in the exam you won't be expected to understand PHP, and this prac is designed just to demonstrate the use of data-driven applications with you, so don't be afraid if you find it quite challenging. So jump in and have a look at those, and that's all I've got for lab session number 7.